record, got a little quote to start us off with, which I just randomly found, which I really like.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
It's amazing. Yeah, I didn't know. Makes me want to read Victor Hugo even more.
Yeah.
Okay, but I have refined my purpose, and so I wanted to discuss that with you. Um, this specific purpose is not that relevant to my work with you. It's just my own personal
Right.
identifying a productive purpose going forward, because
Yeah.
I don't particularly love my current work, so we'll get rid of that. But it's still relevant in some way. And so I've got it down to this, because obviously there's these elements that I had before, but
Yeah.
then part of it is objectivism too. So it's understanding it as a philosophical system. And by understanding, we've spent quite a while talking about what understanding is. Um, by understanding it, it obviously means a very concrete, vivid understanding that I can explain and point to specifics, examples, and then habituating those parts that I agree with. So I didn't want to come in and say implementing the philosophical system. I wanted to say
Right.
understand it in full, and then start the practice of habituating those elements I agree with.
Yeah.
Um,
You wouldn't want to integrate things that you're not sure about yet, but if you agree with something, definitely habituate to integrate that. I think that's a good
right,
way to look at that.
right. And I also wanted to just be clear with myself that I'm not, even though I really like what is being said, and I obviously love the message because I love the fiction, the purpose is not to approach it with the bias of how do I adopt this? It's how do I investigate it? I'm interested, I'm curious. Now I need to investigation and truth first, and then action. So just to make that
Yes.
distinction clear is the reason why I put it that way. Okay. And then with the reasoning part, the only thing I added was, okay, so I wrote about fundamental methods of thinking. Well, but then I added this. So habituating, which is from our discussion, developing, like starting to habituate methods of thinking. And I've even got a little sticky note on my desk, which my camera is crap now, but it says basically, for every thought, when my purpose is to have to when I've set myself a specific purpose that requires thought, one is have a purpose, and then two is question asking. I've written down, and I'm trying to habituate that, so that's my next thing.
Yeah.
um and then what did I add here? I added this category thinking. So this is less objectivism. These are more scientific principles that they may be from psychology. So it's research and cultivate habits that'll make me more intelligent and productive. And
Right.
then and then here's the other one that I added that I think is relevant. Start writing for the purpose of thinking better. At the moment, the only kind of writing that I can do or know how to do is free writing, which is just random jumping associations. I don't
Yeah.
know how to organize my thoughts in written form, I mean. So
Right.
that'll be something that I'll work on. And then this is just recapping the principles I learned from the book. So thinking purposefully, in principles, in essentials, and having a specific list of principles and methods to habituate. So my goal will be to have, which I'm working on, a list that I can keep in front of me, and I can constantly go through. And the purpose is to habituate it and make it a part of me.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's the right attitude.
and then concepts, what did I add? Again, the only addition to concepts, because we've gone through some of these, right? The only addition to concepts now is, again, this idea of habituating, making part of embodying efficacious ways of thinking about concepts and using them. So, for instance, if I read a book and there are a few key words in the book, then I'm like, okay, for me to understand this book, I need to understand these concepts. And so making that a habit. And
Yeah.
then for principles, I added this one, and then so actually I added all these. So this, which is start operating from moral principles. Those I agree on, because I know enough to say that generalizations are essential for survival, and that if I can generalize to broader, more fundamental principles that help me live in a more flourishing way, that's essential. And so I want to start operating from some and then integrate them with scientific principles that I can use for relationships, work, creativity. So that would be, we discussed like cognitive biases or maybe productive habits or just principles that have been induced from science, but are that guide actual action in life. So that, and then, I mean, I'm not telling you need to do all. This is just I'm making this explicit going forward, so we have a standard, and you're obviously a part of that. In that, when I bring material to you or whatever, I'm holding myself accountable to this. It's not your role to do that; it's me, but I'm putting it here anyway. And then we discussed this as well. This came up in, I think, 2 sessions ago. To hold principles in a very vivid, concrete, real form. I said this concrete, the whole section from Peikoff's book of would you debate cutting off your head in order to acquire $1 million? That's how I want to hold principles. So that, and then again, this is back to this habituation. Like there's the scientific principles used to help me habituate those things that I do agree with, because obviously understanding is not enough. And then the only thing I've added to free will is, all right, well, it's fine to understand what I can and can't control, but then I got to practice and habituate what's required to make it happen to be as self-determining as possible. And so that will be worked out later. But again, this comes back down to that discussion on habit. And then I only added integration practice, which means you mentioned this, I think, last conversation when we talked about justice, written reflection over events in fiction. So things I read, to identify the abstractions in them using everything I learned. So like, okay, how does this relate to justice? How does this relate to integrity? And constantly trying to make those connections, which I'll just call that integrative practice. Anyway, that's my refined purpose of my philosophical studies. Any comments before I?
All of them down to principles look really good. The other ones seem just free will seems derivative of the rest. I mean, that's relevant, but it seems more derivative of other things.
Right.
Yeah, it seems to be part of everything about habituating.
Right. Yeah,
yeah,
you're
everything
right.
there is good.
I would only say that I added this because it is a concept that I'm still not fully convinced on, which is strange when you take all this into account, but there's still some element of like, how much do I actually have? But so
Yeah, it might be
clarifying that
just that.
intellectually is.
Yeah, we probably would extend that once we talk about it more. I mean,
Right.
this is what you have so far, just that one sentence. I'm sure once we
Right.
get into it, it'll expand like the others.
Right.
It'll be essentially thinking. Is free
Right.
will thinking is just kind of what it is, but you'll see.
Right.
Integration practice. Um, yeah, I might give you some writing ideas and tips about how to reflect on these things rather than just free writing what strikes you.
Yeah.
I'll help with that.
Yeah. And there's scope for, I think, written work going forward, but we're already doing like a ridiculous amount. So we will get to that. Okay. I will continue refining the purpose as I learn more, but this is what I have now. So, all right. Actually, I don't need to delete that. So it's a separate file.
Yeah.
All right. Some more random things, questions and comments and stuff to discuss. There is a feeling when I'm going through philosophy, sometimes when I'm studying right now, like I want to do something, I want to make something. And the issue is obviously, like it's one thing to just read and study, but if we, I'm looking, even the productivity chapter talks about turning the thoughts and the things and the knowledge you have into material values. And so that's a open-ended question for me of like, or even to you, like, how do you, when you're dealing with people and you're reading books written by people that relative to your current ability, they are genius. How do you also create? Because like, for example, I just spent 40 minutes reading 2 pages of Nietzsche. I'm like, what? How do I then create? Like, but I don't want to just sit and absorb for like 10
Right.
years and not create. I want
Of
to
course.
start creating now. How do you face that? Like if you read Rand or if you read Peikoff, it's not like you can add, or at least I don't feel like I can necessarily add or create
Yeah.
from that material. Yeah.
Well, that's why I say one thing is creating art. I mean, that's not necessarily a focus for everyone, but I think everyone should have some artistic interest on occasion. I mean, that's just one thing to start with. Or like some people just might like drawing sometimes, and that could be sufficient and building up from there. I mean, just by doing drawing, you're almost applying those thinking, those thoughts in a concrete way. You're making, creating something. Surprising enough, the act of making is itself almost fulfilling in itself. Even besides my art and learning a new skill, that might sound trite, but I think learning a new skill or a new hobby or something really gets you thinking about applying certain principles. Like learning new things will require you to integrate new information, come up with new knowledge, using it for something you care about. Um, so there's more abstract things like I like doing science and coming up with theories with empirical evidence, which is my motivation to get into psychology because the act of doing science, doing research is a way I like to apply my knowledge.
Right.
Or it could
Right.
be something like whatever your career might be, it's really applying it to your career already or a new career or anything that you make or anything
Yeah.
you accomplish. It's really broad, of course, but it's almost anything you pick would do just as well. I just like to emphasize art. People, I think, neglect to think of that as productivity, but I think that's just as important.
I think that may be applicable in my case because I'm still in flux as far as my actual original work
Mm-hmm.
goes. And so maybe I could do something like what I wrote with the purpose integrative practice might be like, for example, I read a fictional book. Like, no, I don't think many people would have read Musashi, and then it might be as many people who like say are into Ayn Rand. I don't think many would have read that, but then it would be make integrations and like point out principles embodied and write about it and just put up an essay. That would be like production, right? And creating because I'm taking knowledge and I'm relating it to something else.
Yeah, I think that would count too. It might sound very abstract to people or almost just more of this, but in a way you're doing something that you created. It's not something else somebody else it's not something somebody else taught you.
Mm,
This is something you came up with and it's
yeah,
uniquely yours. And that's,
yeah,
I think I would call that productivity. Yeah,
right,
I'm sure by doing that more, you might discover you want to write about something else sometime, or you might want to
right.
write something about something autobiographical. Maybe you want to write something biographical about somebody you know, or maybe you want to write fiction. It could be anything.
Um, yeah, I can actually see now why it's so important to have a purpose, as in a productive, a central productive purpose, because how else do you like everything you do is measured against that. So if I start reading some article, like whether or not it's relevant is a question of one, I guess, curiosity, but that's a side issue to the central purpose. But the primary is, does it integrate to the central purpose? Can I use this to further fuel my central purpose? And so without that question answered, I can see how it is difficult. And there is that this may actually be, this question may not be that relevant to our studies. It may be my own, I think it's probably my thing right now of not being clear of what I would want to do with my personal work. But with that said,
Yes, yeah, it's probably the case. I think that is
the,
for most people. It's hard to find that.
I think so too. It is a difficult. I mean, there's tons of books written about it. If it was simple, there wouldn't be like 100 books written about picking a career. Um, but with that said, there is also that actual like, it's not just producing, but it's turning into material values. Like there is that um, there is that kind of delay between I'm reading and I'm like, all right, how do I make this a part of me? I want to live it. I want to breathe it. I want to, I want to walk down the street
Right.
and see the abstractions in the concretes. And so there's that, I guess, there's that desire too. And then, but I think the closest we got to answering how do you get there is one, keep studying, and then art and writing. And so the integrative writing would be observing the principles and trying to point out principles in fiction I read, maybe. And that's only all I can think of right now as far as philosophy goes.
Do you know Walden Pond by Thoreau?
I know Thoreau. I don't know. What book that. I don't know what you
He
mentioned though.
stayed at a lake in, I think, New York for like a year or something.
Walden
And
Pond.
yeah, Walden, I think it's called.
Okay.
Walden. And he basically was kind of like living his philosophy in a way that he was trying to experience life, not just reflect on his life, I guess. Like he went and lived in the woods for a long time, for like a year. And well, I don't know how long, but he really immersed himself in his environment to, I wouldn't call that productivity, but it's like living it and breathing it is kind of what I'm thinking. The transcendentalists, they were called in America. There are other
Right.
philosophers like him, so they all had that same kind of attitude.
Um, that would be productivity, right? If you're embodying your values, and if it's not well, it's integrity, but it's also how do you translate this into material values, what you believe and what like
Yeah.
if I'm reading about evil, which we'll get to, for example, how do I then translate that into material values? How do I let that dictate my actions? That I don't know
Yeah.
if that's productivity, but I mean that's what I'm trying to get at, like embodying everything you read, making it a part of you. And so, do you think he's worth reading? Is that why you pointed him out?
A lot of people do like him. I know objectivists like him too. At least that
Yeah.
book they tend to like.
Yeah.
Even though
Okay.
they might not like anything else by him. That's a good book.
Okay. I'll put it. Wow.
Because American philosophers will often propose something interesting in like relation to Rand, even because they have more individualistic attitudes generally than say European philosophers.
Yeah.
So that's what you tend to find something valuable in them.
It's interesting. Just have you read Jack London?
Yeah, enough that I know I like him a lot.
I love him too. Have you read Martin Eden?
I haven't. I think that's one of the ones I want to read. But
It's
yeah, I mean,
fascinating.
it's just like how great as an American writer he is. I value those other authors for similar reasons.
You're right about the individualism. He wrote. It sort of makes me think of Wall Street, which is they're supposed to demonize the evil hedge fund managers, but I remember watching Wall Street ages ago, and I
Yeah,
fell in love with the guy and his greed is good speech. That was
yeah,
like it was motivating, and it's same in Martin Eden. Yeah, I think that his theme apparently, which makes no sense at all, in some way, was about the collective versus the individual, and you come out feeling this intense uh, desire to be the individual and to be like the individual, even if it all ends, even if it's all tragic, it's worth it. That which is kind of interesting because I think, yeah, you're right. So the
yeah.
American something in that American in their culture for the emphasis on the individual. I bookmarked Thoreau, so we'll get to that. Um, so in short, so really all we can do, like separating this from the issue of my general work and career related questions, which are not relevant to this tutorial, in terms of producing writing essays and maybe writing essays on fiction, that would be maybe
Yeah, it seems
the
more your
thing.
style for doing things. Yeah,
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm open to anything really, as long as it helps
yeah.
me integrate.
But I
Um,
always encourage people just try art sometime. Just even if you don't think you're good at it, just
okay,
write something sometimes.
but
Even if it's
what,
one page.
like,
I don't
what
know,
would I? I
like
don't even know how.
um if you ever picture it comes more naturally to some people like if you ever pictured something happening or maybe a fable if you ever pictured those or you just imagine something an event it's
Okay,
uh not always conducive for most people. Some people are better at drawing that they see an image and they're better at just drawing that.
I will actually, last night I tried to draw. The issue is I can imagine things I want to draw, but the technical skill is like possibly a years long
Yeah.
journey. But writing,
Yes, you're right.
writing is, that could work if I'm not, if it's not too ambitious and it's just like you said, a fanciful scene where there's no necessarily, is that what you're saying? Just right, like you imagine a certain scenario, there's no ending or like message. It's
Yeah,
just
that could work. I used to
okay,
do that. And I've used writing exercises that do that. Like I just think of a time period in an object and just write for 10 minutes and see what end up with. But sometimes
okay.
that takes practice. Or you could just write even a short poem. You don't even need to do it right. It's just
I don't even know
it's
how to
just
write poetry, but as in the
that's the thing. You
sounds and
just kind
stuff.
of let it happen. You just
Okay.
let it happen in a way.
Maybe I
Or even
should.
just
Yeah.
or even just like, oh, this is what I experienced when I saw a beautiful sunset or something. I mean, just write down the thoughts, and in a way, that's art as well. You're you're like describing in a poetic, flowery way, things like that.
Okay. And then, but then how does that integrate with what because it's not producing for the sake of producing, but I mean, producing,
Yes.
transforming those things that I'm learning about the abstractions into something. It doesn't have to be massive. Like I'm not going to write,
Yeah.
the dim hypothesis here. I just want to make little creations.
I think it can concretize, like we were saying,
Okay.
abstractions we have, or make clear emotions we're feeling, or make
Okay.
clear things in our mind.
Okay.
It doesn't even need to be much. I mean, I think it's surprising how a small bit of poetry can go a long way, for example. Like you might
Okay.
not even realize until you write it. Like I rarely write poetry. Like, I really don't like doing it, but I've written a few poems.
Yeah. All right, I will give this more thought, and I guess the parallel are technical skills, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm just going to worry about,
Yeah,
like you said, it might even be like half a page of I read something and then I'm like, what does that look like? And I create an imaginary scenario, right? That kind of thing.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, the technical skills, of course, can always come in, but I think everybody should do art regardless of their technical ability, even once in a while.
Okay. I will look into that and try some random things. Okay. Proper nouns do not have a genus, right? Genuses are only relevant when you're speaking about like Lewis. There's no, unless I'm saying Lewis as a man, genus is animal. There's no like a proper, like when we're genus is only relevant to definitions, right? That's what we're.
Um, I'm looking at the paragraph where she talks about this, about a proper noun. I mean, there is a genus. It'd be more like in terms of like your genealogy. I think usually, like it does go to my
Okay.
last name. Like
Okay.
of people with my last name, which individual are they talking about?
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
It's
But
more
like
like
the
that.
Eiffel Tower, I think it was in the, actually it was in the ITO, like Eiffel
Yeah,
Tower doesn't have, it's not relevant. Eiffel, you're pointing to a specific thing.
yeah,
The other thing I was thinking about was like when I'm trying to clarify my concepts and I'm like, okay, well, I was thinking about proof, for example. So there is the only confusing thing about one confusing thing, not the only, about when I'm clarifying the concepts is that depending on there are different parts of it that refer to different things. So there's like, when I say proof, I could mean the proof, like the specific observations that
mm-hmm.
were relevant to the conclusion, right? Or I could mean proof in terms of a process. So, then in that case, if I'm talking about proof as the process, I'm talking about proof is a kind of validation. If I'm talking about proof uh, as the specific observations, then it's a kind of knowledge. And so how do if the purpose of defining according to genus and differentia is to help you retain and more easily access relevant subconscious knowledge, how do you deal with this kind of like
The proof.
the fact that the proof
Yeah.
can refer to different, that it's sort of the same concept, right? But it's referring to different things. And so when I'm organizing it in my mind, I could say, well, it's a kind of knowledge when I'm saying it's the specific observations, or I could say it's a process of validation. It's a particular process or method of validation.
Trying to think through that. So I mean, you got the proof. Well, when you say the proof, what are you referring to in a way? I understand you're distinguishing between the noun and the verb, but
Okay. Maybe that's my question is when you've got a concept and it's got a noun and a verb, like how do you then conceptually organize it so you can easily access the relevant, using the genus differential method, accessing the relevant subconscious knowledge when you'll define it differently depending on whether it's a noun or a verb.
I'm trying to think of other examples. Like you could say the process of running versus the run. Like the run versus
Run is a kind of
the
motion,
process of running.
right?
I would almost think, are they really different? They seem to be referring to the same thing. The same thing. And even if they're referring to the same thing, they could refer to the same aspect. This is hard because I mean, we can talk about proof in terms of different kinds of knowledge. Um, it seems that it does refer to always a process, and the process you're either referring to the complete duration of it, or you're referring to the
Because
present progressive.
look, like if I say, all humans are mortal. There's a validation I go through to prove that to myself. But if someone asks you, what's the proof? They're referring to the specific observations, are they not? Rather than they're referring to like, show me what you looked at. Whereas if they're saying, show me what you looked at in order to reach that conclusion. So that's not, I don't know. Now I'm
That
confused, to
might
be
be
honest.
evidence. You might be talking about evidence.
Right,
Then.
right. So then proof, okay. So proof could be, the word proof could refer to the concept of evidence, or it could refer to the concept of proof.
Yeah, I mean, usually when you say, show me the proof that you're right, would be to say that, show me your argument in a way,
Right.
not necessarily directly the evidence. And you might, like when I think about the proof, I think about the process or how do I indicate the parts of that process? Like I say, the proof is this syllogism. The process of proving is the proof. I mean, it's not you could refer to the end result of your proof, but I would say the proof is the like the whole process, and you might refer to something else. Well, show me the evidence of the proof, or show me the evidence you use in the proof.
Right.
It's a bit tricky with the wording here, because I think usually you would mean that the proof being the process. Even when you say the proof, you still refer to the process in a way, either the finished one or the activity of it.
So that there's no problem. It's a matter of how the word is being used. So the word could be used to refer to evidence, or it could be used to refer to actual proof. Like you could say, show me the proof. Someone could be, from the context, you'd work out that they're referring to the concept evidence. In that case, it's not that the concept proof is a kind of knowledge or a kind of validation, but it's more like proof is a kind of validation, but proof, the word, can refer to the concept evidence, in which case you're then referring to the concept evidence, which is a kind of knowledge. So it's just being aware of that, maybe.
Maybe in others, I would say, usually in oneself, that might be a case where you might want to clarify in your mind and pick a way to use the word and say, well, I'm being imprecise. I should say evidence here. And then I should say proof when I'm talking about like the whole argument. Like you should be able to in your mind where
Okay.
the dividing lines are. And I think if you
Okay.
use the word proof in both contexts, it could be confusing because you're using the same
Yes.
word to refer to the same phenomena, and it could be really confusing.
Yeah.
I always prefer to focus on either. You can focus on the entire event of something abstract, or you can think of the a particular. Well, it can either be thought of as a verb or a noun, because like ideas are nouns, but obviously you can't touch or see them. It's like either way you're using it as a noun. I think that's the key thing. It's a sort of like reason isn't an object but a process. You can refer to the faculty of reason, but you're still referring to the process.
Right.
At least in objectivist understanding, to refer to the process is to refer to the thing. So referring to the proving is the same as the proof,
Yep.
I would say.
Okay. That's cool. And I've got like a whole notepad full of questions about conceptual organization, which I'm going to post about that specifically though, but that's good. I read, you know how you mentioned the vision of Ayn Rand?
Yes.
I've started reading snippets of it.
Yeah.
Although I find him, what I like about him, this is more important, right? Principle of justice here. What I really like about Brandon is the many examples he gives. And so I found this section on evil particularly fascinating and interesting because there's something that I don't get about it. And I wanted to discuss with you. Have
I
you
think
read
I
that
know that.
section?
I think I know that one. I found myself disagreeing the way he
Oh, yeah.
phrased it, I think.
Okay. There was
If
something
I'm
in there.
recalling the right one.
What are you thinking of?
I was thinking of, I think it was something to do with saying that doing evil is not even on purpose because it's still just a lack of thinking. So it's not even deliberate. It's just, that's what I got the impression of. He was saying that it's not even deliberate. Like it's just an aspect of not thinking.
I can find the relevant section. I didn't interpret it that way, but I haven't read the whole thing.
I might
There was
be misremembering.
there was a particular part in there that really interested me because I feel like it's getting at something that I just don't, that is important, but I just don't get. I know it's important. I'll paste the relevant section.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in there that's, let's see where it is. Okay, here, I found it.
Yeah.
All right, and this speaks to what you're saying too. All right, I just need to quickly format this so it's readable. It's an absolute mess right now as far as. Okay, I think this is. I'm just formatting it. There we go. Okay, this is the relevant section. So this is the part where I'm, wow, there's something here, and I knew that I didn't understand something because I've always seen it. This person he's describing in the scene is me. A man might open a newspaper and see the bright smiling face of an attractive, intelligent child. He then reads that the child in the picture has been wantonly beaten and murdered by some kidnapper who, it was discovered, had no intention of ever returning the child, even if he obtained the ransom. Now, to feel a strong moral indignation at such a story is surely normal and rational. But suppose the man reading the story feels more than that. He feels, let's say, a literal metaphysical horror bordering almost on personal fear, a horror that's at the sight, not merely of the depraved, but of the metaphysical metaphysically impossible and inconceivable. He feels, in effect, how could the kidnapper be so unutterably a monster as to turn against and destroy the life of the innocent child? That's me. And I know, I actually think other people have experienced this and ended up with PTSD when they've actually come into contact with it in real life. I remember watching a documentary about a guy who, this is exactly what he was a policeman, and he saw the bloodbath of like a mass shooting we had in Australia many years ago. And he was literally, for the rest of his life, until he ended up in the States and doing all this MDMA therapy, he was completely crushed by it. He couldn't get out of it. He didn't understand it. How could this be? How could this happen? So anyway, it's me, and I think it's pretty common. And that's why it really made me think about this whole section. Implicit in his feeling is the belief that, fully as much as himself, the kidnapper clearly perceived the value of the child's life and yet chose, for no real reason whatever, to destroy that life. This, if it were literally true, would be psychologically and metaphysically incomprehensible and inconceivable. This is the claim. Not that it's inconceivable, but the claim is, the claim is actually this, but that he's saying this is not the state of the kidnapper's evil. He's saying he did not clearly perceive the value of the child's life. He is fully as much as monster as the man believes, but for a different reason. The kidnapper's evil is not that, having achieved the full understanding of the value of human life, he still chose to commit a wanton murder, but that he never chose to reach the level of understanding the value of human life. This is the claim, that he arrested his development on so primitively a savage level that human life had no meaning to him. But he isn't saying that he's got no consciousness of doing wrong, which is what you said. Yeah. He would have a chronic consciousness of doing wrong, but he would not perceive the nature of or meaning of his evil with the same clarity as the man reading the newspaper. So he's not saying there's complete unconsciousness, but he's saying there is a difference in that consciousness.
Well, I don't see why you couldn't, or why the kidnapper couldn't have saw it and chose to do wrong on purpose and didn't care. It just felt like it. I mean, it doesn't mean he didn't understand. You could literally understand something and just choose not to follow it. I mean, I don't see why we should assume that he doesn't understand or he doesn't understand the value of human life, just that he wanted to destroy it precisely because he knew how important it is to somebody else. He doesn't care, but he knows somebody else does. So he does it because he knows it will destroy things. I mean, I just don't see why that can't be possible.
That's where I'm having trouble with, right? So he says if he saw, and I do think, so if he saw the issue as the man saw it, he would not, this is his claim, which is what we're discussing, he would not have committed the murder, and his depravity is that he didn't see it. And I'm like you, I'm not on your side or on his side. I feel like there's something to it, but I'm not really sure, and this was my original question. Can you ever knowingly do evil? I mean, like, you can seek to destroy something, but can you go, let's put aside this issue of the child and go, for me right now, I've got a stove, and I know, to me, it would be absolutely evil to just put my hand on it and burn my hand for no reason whatsoever. So, but could I do that? Like, well, it's kind of strange to think about, because no, I'm obviously not going to do that ever. Like, why? Why would I do that if I know it's absolutely evil? And so there is that question of, can you, like, if you know something is absolutely terrible and disgusting, can you do it?
I mean, I don't think anybody would do anything unless they had some reason to do so. I can't imagine somebody doing it because they had no thought whatsoever. I mean, I don't think that'd be very common, that somebody literally doesn't even think about it. It doesn't seem to coincide with human action even.
Right. So even a murderer, though, he has his own, you could say, or a killer or whatever, like, they all have their own distorted value system. And so on some level, like, if you really saw this kid as value and its life as value, life has value, I think that's the key. Could he still and just completely go against that and randomly like that would be incomprehensible. You're like, this is an amazing child, he's got potential, life can be beautiful, and then you just decide to like that would actually be incomprehensible, right? But I can, which I, but that's what I'm not sure of. Like, is that possible or not? I try to think for myself, and I'm go, well, I would never like if I clearly know that randomly burning my hand off would be evil. Why would I like? I couldn't do it. Like, there'd be no. I that's me.
To start off with, I think you could just say that it won't make sense what they do because they don't think like you. That's just it. You're not gonna understand whatever chaos goes on in their mind, whether it's thinking or poor application or they don't care, or you think they should care but they don't. I think the least you could say is that they don't think like you, so of course it doesn't make sense. If anyone
No,
had
but
some standards of rationality, they wouldn't do it, but by definition they're not like you. They're even further from most people
but
than you
that's
would
what I
imagine.
mean. Like, they're still on some level. Like, actually, it does become comprehensible when you think. Like, it is
It can
incomprehensible when
be.
you think about it. Like, when you think about someone who's clearly perceiving good and then destroying good.
Yeah.
But it isn't it so it is incomprehensible, but it is comprehensible once you assume that they are somehow they want to destroy something, but they're hiding. They're not thinking about it being good, so they're intentionally finding a way to turn away so they can do it. Then it does become comprehensible in the way he's describing, because by a gradual process of like turning away from something and habituating, say, like acting on range of the moment emotion and being used to turning to blindness, you can see how this can happen. But if you just imagine, like, I don't know, I mean, how many sessions have I had with you? A lot. We got to know each other a bit. Like, I couldn't, it'd be hard to just imagine someone you know well and you know a little bit about them just suddenly turning into something completely different and deciding they want to go on a murder rampage. Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
What
But
I could say maybe is that we're talking about here what does it mean to have the full understanding? Because I think maybe if you said that the person just doesn't care, would they even have a full understanding of what human life is? Does that make
but then
sense?
if they think existence is evil, like if you go with his and they're turning away from its
Yeah,
value, because let's say it's got a rational value,
right.
and then they think existence is evil, and they're not thinking about the value, that to them it would make sense that you kill what's evil is existence. And so you do try and destroy everything you can. They're not even perceiving, he's saying they're not perceiving the value. And to them, if you are thinking about it in terms of like, just say, hey, you might want to fight evil, I might want to fight evil, what evil in myself, like my impulses or whatever, that I don't think add to flourishing. I could perceive that in some ways evil. Just as in the same way that I'm motivated to fight and do bad, to destroy evil. They might be, if they think all of existence is evil, for however they got to that point, then it suddenly does become comprehensible that to them, this is not, they're not perceiving things the way you are. Do you know what I'm saying? What is incomprehensible is that they are perceiving the way things you are, like he's described, but they choose to destroy it anyway.
Yeah. It's hard to understand this because to an extent it's if you've lived your life in a way that is acknowledging these things, could you ever be in a state where you act against those values? I mean, I don't even know if that's possible if you have gotten to understand it, could you actually act against it if you've understood it?
So this is
Like you're
yeah, go on.
like you're not an expert yet, so of course you're gonna screw up at some point where it wouldn't be surprising that um, well, let me phrase it differently. Um, say if you've understood it till you've integrated it all correctly and you've got the right attitude, just assume you've got the objectively true idea of what evil is, or at least you came to a reasonable conclusion that you understand it, and you have no reason to really doubt anything you say. If you've gotten to that state of mind where you actually integrate into your thinking, and if integration implies also acting and habituating, if that's included in our understanding, could you really be in a state where you say, well, I just don't care? Could you say, I understand truly what it means to live against or to live for my own life? I just choose not to do it. Could somebody really manage to accomplish that
So
psychologically, or would they
what? Right. Well,
to? Yeah.
that's exactly my question. Is
Yeah.
can you? Because I can imagine someone who
Okay.
does believe in certain things, and like good things, they see the value of life, but because you've habituated, say, like let's say you're an alcoholic or and you're constantly evading, and you've habituated certain things, you might do something evil in a moment of
All right.
rage where you go just on an emotion, right? Because you at that point
Yeah.
you're not perceiving anything else. But that my exact question is what you're talking about is like,
Okay. Good.
can someone be conscious of them doing something terrible and conscious that this is evil and do it
Okay.
anyway?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got the question now. I just wanted to be sure that was correct. Okay. So,
With full lucid perception, like this child is good, this life is good, and I'm going to destroy it. Like, can you? That's what that's what I'm not clear on.
I'm not sure you can. I think that's might be Brandon's implicit point here. That the only way to do that is to arrest your thinking deliberately. Somehow it's not just a mistake, but you're deliberately choosing not to think. And that's the only way it could really happen. That you have to ignore one fact, or even if it's just one fact, you have to ignore it. You have to evade it or deny that it's even true or look the other way.
Right. That's what he's implicitly saying. But then
I think
the
so.
the confusion I have is that then it comes to free will, because I think like what we're saying is that man can only act against that which he can. It almost seems like we're saying man can only act against that which he clearly perceives to be evil, but he cannot act for no, but he cannot act against that which he clearly perceives to be good. The only way he can do it, this is the claim, is if he is blind to the fact that it's good. Which to me, this like, but then what is the motive power of man? Like, is there not I don't know. There's something weird where I'm not getting it here, because I feel like there's almost a restriction on what man can do. You're saying that he can only act on what he thinks is good. He cannot act on what he thinks is bad. And this is thinks, as in clearly perceives, not just ignores it. This is to me is like a fundamental shift in the way I see human nature, if this is true. But I don't know how do I know it for myself it's true, but how do I know? Like I can't, like going to that stove example, I can't do that, because why would I? Like why?
Okay, here's my thinking. So, assuming you understand the concept of or what it is to do evil, like assuming that much at least, I'm leaving aside where a person has made a mistake in their knowledge or they didn't realize something to be
Yeah.
good, or it's actually they're mistaken in the true nature of evil. So let's assume they understand it, are integrated and are trying to live by it. And okay, then the only way to change your view there is just to arbitrarily decide today, I'm not going to value life. Today, I'm going to go against life in every choice I make. But you just, whatever reason, you just decided that one day. How would you manage that? I think on some level, you have to deny some piece of evidence you have. You'd have to decide one day there's one principle you don't want to observe. I guess in a way that is begging the question, because the whole point is that you've chosen not to observe it, and that in a way the choice is the evasion. Like if you act against your life, I think that would imply that you've um, eliminated the concept of whatever it means to uh, guide your actions through flourishing. that you've ceased to use flourishing as a standard for action. Even if it's just for a moment, you said, I'm not going to use this standard of action. You've almost eliminated standards of thinking there, at least a little bit. You started to. You took one fact and you like turned it off for a while. This, like, it seemed like the only way you could start acting against your beliefs and even what motivates your actions to arrest your thinking for a period of time. Don't think about something for a while so that you can accomplish this. Don't think about flourishing in order to accomplish these ends. Not just saying I don't want to, but literally no longer thinking about it.
Right. So I guess you're saying there was one thing that you were saying, which is I actually what this comes down to is, do humans need a reason to act? And then can you act
Yes.
like there's good and there's evil? And so what reason would you have to act? If you clearly perceive something is good, what reason would you have to act against it?
Mm-hmm. I think most of the time, yes, if somebody turned off their thinking, but I'm trying to think of even like extreme cases like serial killers or something like that, like the real extreme cases of evil. I think most people like do a wrong because they stopped thinking for a while. It wasn't because they knew what was right and decided not to do it. I think they genuinely didn't know what was right. I think that's usually the case, and usually it's caused by not thinking.
But there's a difference between knowing what's right and then deciding not to do it, because you could just push it aside. And that there's a difference between that and knowing what's good, perceiving it, and then intentionally acting to destroy it. Like holding in mind, this is good, and now I want to kill it. Like that is different.
Yeah. It's a difficult question because you're trying to answer why people would want consistency and why people want to even follow their own beliefs. Um,
Well, it's important because it does seem to get at something fundamental to human nature, which I didn't think about. I was like this guy, and I think other people are too, where it's just this incomprehensible, like how could this person do that? Like how is this possible? It is literally a metaphysical horror. That totally resonated with me. But then this perspective changes it completely, and that's what I think even in Socrates, there's something about man cannot do. I'm not sure. I need to find it, but
yeah.
can man ever act for something that he knows is evil without blanking out at all, with clear perception?
Yeah.
And by the way, there was a discussion on the Objectivist seminar, which they did a study group for OPA years ago. And they were talking about how one thing that makes us human is the fact that we cannot immediately change ourselves. Think about if you could immediately recode your emotion and go, oh, I don't believe that. And then you shift. So like one day I'm speaking to you and the next time a completely different person. You're like, you tell me one thing, I change my mind. I don't even speak the same. I don't talk the same. There's like Jonathan on day one and there's Jonathan on session 3. They're two completely different people. But because of the fact that our emotions and coding is endearing in some sense and takes a while to change, we do have that. There is that constant. Here is Jonathan. Here is Louis. There's something consistent about us. And so I think that's relevant too, that we can't just change on an instant, but maybe in the case of a serial killer, you could. I don't know. But
Yeah, you couldn't change in an instant. That's for sure. And perhaps another way to look at it is on the one hand, we can think of people who are well integrated and have a good understanding and full understanding of the value of human life. Would they ever go off and knowingly do evil according to their standards? And then we could think of another type of person who, say, somebody who doesn't have a full understanding of what the value of human life, they might see something good about or something worthwhile in certain evil actions. And because of their incomplete understanding that life isn't flourishing, doesn't really have to do with good or bad. they might knowingly do something evil because they don't think morality has to do with
Well,
flourishing.
we need a
So that'd be a
specific
different understanding.
we need a specific
True.
example though, because what you're calling evil, they may not perceive as evil, and I think this is where the issue is like the question is what you're saying they do that's evil, are they clearly perceiving that it's evil with full conscious awareness and then acting on it, or are we saying it's evil from our perspective and they're acting on that thing? Which, because they could be, if you think all of existence is evil, then it makes sense you want to destroy as much of it as you can, right?
Yeah, it would.
This is an open-ended discussion, and I'm really I mean, this is, to me, is like, this is huge because I'm exactly what he described. That is, this kind of thing is absolutely incomprehensible to me. But now with this perspective, it suddenly isn't so incomprehensible.
Yeah, part of the comprehensibility is that if you want to understand something where a person completely goes against any norm or standard you can only think in terms of their failures of thinking. How they failed to think is the only way to really understand what they did. You can't understand it in terms of what you do. You can't understand it in terms of what you think is rational. You have to use whatever standard they are. They are choosing to operate by these different standards. And it might not make sense why somebody would want to, but they are using different standards. So of course they'll have a different reason for acting. And it